Hello, everyone. I'm Kathleen Jackson, one of the board members of the Texas Water Development Board. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Hope you've enjoyed our conference. This is our last general session of the conference, and hope you've enjoyed it, had a good time, met with friends, talked with folks about thoughts and ideas, and we'll take some of those back with you. The first thing I'd like to do is to recognize some very important people to the Water Development Board, people who we stand on the shoulders of those who go before us, and our former board members are here today, and I'd ask them if they would please stand after I call their name. Carlos Rubenstein, one of the former chairmen of the board. Dr. Elaine Barone from El Paso. And Orthan Modia, also from El Paso. Thank you so much for being here and for your contributions to the Water Development Board. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce our closing agenda, Back to the Future, A History of Texas Water Policy, and our moderator, Heather Harwood. Heather has and continues to be a longtime champion for Texas water. She's a true advocate for implementing the state water plan projects across Texas, and in her former role as founder and executive director of H2O for Texas, she traveled extensively across Texas to meet with water providers and water customers committed to securing implementation of the state water plan. I first met Heather over 15 years ago, and when I was appointed to the board in 2014, she was one of the first people I reached out to get her thoughts and ideas about water policy. Today, Heather has her own consulting firm and represents various clients, including the Texas Water Supply Partners. Heather recently stopped by my office just to kind of catch up, and following the meeting, I tweeted out a picture for us. And do you know that that tweet was one of the most liked tweets that I have ever tweeted, one of the most popular posts on social media, and of course, you'd all understand and agree why that is if you know Heather. Heather, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your leadership, and thanks for our wonderful panelists for being here as well. We're especially excited to hear from our former legislators today that will discuss major water policy during their tenures, the results they envisioned, the outcomes, and the impact on today's water landscape. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome Heather Harwood and her panelists.
Testing, we're live. Good afternoon, good lunch hour. Hope y'all are enjoying your meal. Director Jackson, thank you for the very generous introduction. I'm embarrassed to admit that I am not providing similar introductions for our panelists. So that's my first mistake. Before we go any further, want to congratulate the Water Development Board, Director Jackson, Chairman Lake, and Director Pop on a truly incredible conference. I am blown away by the level of participation and attendance. It's incredible today, but it's even been more impressive in the preceding day. So congratulations to you all, Jeff, and your incredible team at the Water Development Board. I am super honored and humbled to be asked to moderate this panel. But I'm also, for those of you all who have talked to me, incredibly nervous. And that's for a number of reasons. Starting with, if ever there was a Water Hall of Fame in the state of Texas, certainly these would be the first 4 inductees. I'm not supposed to cry right when you start. But if I'm truly honest with myself, I think the other reason that I'm incredibly nervous is because the last time that I remember a panel of this caliber being assembled, it was in 2011 in front of Chairman Ritter's committee, where he asked a similar group, almost this exact same panel, to come forward and talk about funding options for the state water plan. And it was a highly anticipated testimony. It was the first time, and I believe still the only time, that Senator Brown testified in front of a legislative committee since he left the legislature. But what was also important about that day is that it was the first time that I testified in front of a legislative committee as a former legislative staffer, which in and of itself is daunting and incredibly intimidating. For those of you all that are former legislative staffers, making that transition in some ways feels illegal, like you're not supposed to be doing it. But my day was especially special and intimidating and embarrassing and humiliating. And I've not talked about it in public since that day. But with several years in my rearview mirror and some therapy, I'm going to tell y'all how that went down. The morning started, and I just started H2O for Texas Coalition, and I was proud to submit a stack of witness cards. We still had cards back then. And I submitted those witness cards, turned around and walked out, and Carolyn Britton was sitting on the front row next to the chairman of the Water Development Board, and she escorted me out of the hearing room, I thought probably to give me a pep talk. But she put her hand on my backside, cool as a cucumber, to alert me that I had busted the seat of my pants open in front of the chairman of the Water Development Board and the rest of the committee hearing. This is the gospel truth. Liz Fazio graciously postponed my testimony until later in the day so that I could go home and change my pants. Brian Sledge offered to escort me out the bowels of the Capitol in typical Sledge fashion if I would show him the rip. I came back, dressed down to here, got ready to testify, no joke, where I proceeded to fall down in the middle of the committee hearing, on my face, on camera. As I'm going down, Carol McGarrah screamed aghast from the back of the room, "No way." And I looked across the room for some support, and Sledge and Averitt were sitting next to each other, and they went, "Don't know her, don't claim her, never seen her before." So now that I've told that, I'm feeling better. I think I've gotten the nerves out a little bit. I know that this panel is going to be as riveting as the testimony was in 2011. I, for one, am hoping it's without incident. The goal of the panel is to walk you through 2 decades of landmark water legislation in the state of Texas, from Senate Bill 1 to House Bill 4. As I said, I am not going to provide bios or much background information on these esteemed gentlemen because these 4 guys truly do not need an introduction. But I would like to take a moment to introduce their leadership positions and their years of service, beginning with Chairman Brown. The Honorable Buster Brown, former chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, a 21-year veteran of the Texas legislature, and author of Senate Bill 1 in 1997 and Senate Bill 2 in 2001. The Honorable Kip Averitt, also former chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, an 18-year veteran of the Texas legislature who served in both the Texas House of Representatives and the Texas Senate and was crazy enough to hire me, but that's before I fell on my face. He was the author of Senate Bill 3 in 2007. His counterpart at the time in the House of Representatives, the Honorable Robert Puente, former chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, a 17-year veteran of the Texas legislature. He was the sponsor of Senate Bill 3, but also in that same session, the author of House Bill 3 and House Bill 4. And finally, the people's favorite, the Honorable Allan Ritter, former chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, a 16-year veteran of the Texas legislature, and the author of House Bill 4, I like to call the big, important bow around the work preceding the previous bills. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chairman Brown. I say without further ado, but I want to make a few opening comments about things that I have seen about these pieces of legislation that I hope that y'all will take away. First, each one of these landmark bills built on the one preceding it. The second, they all were in many cases in response to drought in the state of Texas, and also growth, with the objective of making sure we maintained our vibrant economy in this state. And what I would say most importantly, the strand that runs through the leadership of these four gentlemen and the landmark pieces of legislation that they enacted into law was vision, leadership, and political moxie. Not only them, but their respective authors and the leadership in their respective chambers. So I give you the man, the myth, the legend, the godfather of water, the Honorable Buster Brown.
Thank you. I think, I don't know, is this on? It may be the grandfather now. Yeah, thank you, Heather. It's nice to be here and join this panel. I'm not sure that my talk comes under the right category. It may be under Texas history, since it's 1997, but 22 years ago. And what I did, of course, I was the author, but what I did through the passage of Senate Bill 1 and 2 was in a great deal due to the work of the Water Development Board and the TNRCC at the time, and the staff that we had put together, both House and Senate, and then a tremendous number of stakeholders from all walks of life that were dealing with water. And we were able to bring all that together at an unusual time. Maybe it's like the perfect storm, but the positive side, because doing what we did then may not be able to be done today, but the time was right, and so everybody worked together and brought it about. And the Water Development Board had issued a report just prior to the beginning of the session in that year related to the drought and what needed to be done in order to avoid having tremendous negative effect on our economy. And Governor Bullock called me in and had that study on his desk, and he said, I want you to file a bill. I want you to, we don't have a water plan. We need a water plan. I want you to file a bill. But I want you to understand that you probably won't pass it, but we need to start it. It may be a 3-session deal, but he said, we don't have a water plan, and we have to have one, so we got to start it. And I said, well, do you mind if I try to pass it? And he said, no, yeah, have at it. Do your best, but just keep in mind, I won't be disappointed if you don't get it done. Well, we ended up getting it done through a lot of work by a lot of people. And looking back on it, which I did this week so that I'd be sure to remember what I did, the planning aspect of it, regional water planning, we determined that you could not adopt a state plan that was run by the state because all the locals did not trust the state when it comes to water. And so to try to prevent that from killing the bill, we developed these regions and had planning at the local level, which satisfied every section of the state that they would have their opportunity to be a part of the planning. It seems pretty simple now, but it was pretty complicated at the time, convincing people that even when there are differences between the regions, the Water Development Board would reconcile those differences. There was still suspicions at the time, so we were able to overcome that. We counted one time, and I'll mention this only because you can't always do this, but most of the time you develop a bill, you take it to Leg Council, you file it, and then you get reactions to it. And if there are negative reactions, then it's probably a dead bill because nobody likes it, because there's a piece of it that they don't like. We didn't do that. Instead, we took the bill and we didn't file it. We started bringing in stakeholders. And 72 meetings that we had with people who were on the opposite sides of issues, water issues, And we went through the bill and found their differences and then worked on getting those differences solved so that when it came time and the bill was finally presented, we had very little opposition to the bill because all the work had been done in advance instead of it in a committee with 3-minute testimony. And so that factor was very significant. But the regional water planning, as a result of that, we tried to provide groundwater management, required groundwater district management plans so that the districts that are being created would have a scientific and geographic goal in mind why they're creating a district. And that was to be reviewed by the Water Development Board. Water availability modeling of the river authorities so we would know how much water is actually available for the future. We also had Small Communities Assistance Fund because in the report that was issued, they showed the aging of small communities and their pipelines to their houses were getting old and they don't have a tax base in order to replace those. And so we provided for the beginning of that funding. And then probably the worst part of Senate Bill 1, Ritter won't agree, was the junior rights provision that was put in the House, which is still there today. Bullock told me as I went back and we went through the differences in the bill and came up, and I said, okay, we're down to one deal in junior rights, and he said, you got to take it. And he said, come back next session, people will change, you can take it out. Well, it's still there. And so Bullock was incorrect in that regard. But the idea that led to, we also stated in Senate Bill 1 that groundwater districts were the preferred method of managing local groundwater, and that was because there was a lot of pressure on us to do away with I can't think of what we call it now, where you're able to pump whatever you want to pump.
Rule of capture?
Yeah, rule of capture, and replace it with a rule based upon correlative rights. Well, my instincts told me if we did that, the bill would be dead, and so we decided instead to focus on locally elected groundwater districts to manage the groundwater. Now, when the combination of the junior rights provision and the encouragement of the creation of groundwater districts, all of a sudden in the next session, there was 40 or 50 proposals to create new groundwater districts. And that was in the 99 session. And we did not do that. On the Senate side, we put those into a single bill and had them partially created, but required they come back the next session and show that they have done some hydrological studies and have a plan for what they're going to do with the water. Half of them basically told me what I could do with that plan, and they withdrew their bills. The others, of course, did that and came back the next session and said it really worked. We now know what we're doing. And so Senate Bill 2 came about, and we reinstituted those groundwater districts, and we focused on conjunctive use, that for the future of Texas, we got to had to combine surface water and groundwater, or we would see too much pressure develop over the years on groundwater as the only source of new water. And so that has come to reality, and now we're facing issues about how we are able to manage the groundwater in a way that preserves. As an example, the small rural communities are facing a challenge because the larger urban areas are more capable of raising the money to buy water than are those small rural areas, and so it's an issue that has to be faced. We did create a water infrastructure fund, and the bill, when it started, had 5 different funding mechanisms in it. Am I running out of time?
Nope.
5 different funding mechanisms in it that would produce $70 million a year in income, and the Water Development Board, they said they could extrapolate that into a huge amount of dollars for meeting the requirements of like fixing the infrastructure. But as the bill went through the process, through committee and then through the Senate and then to the House and came back, there was no funding mechanism. The fund was created, but no funding mechanism was created. We also created one for a rural assistance fund because we knew that the cities were better capable of preparing the applications, and the small cities didn't have that kind of capacity, and so there was unfair competition as far as the dollars that the Water Development Board was going to be getting. That's still somewhat of an imbalance, but it's better now than it was before that bill was created. And the issues are still the same. We did create the Texas Water Advisory Council, which I thought was a great idea, where all the agencies responsible for water would get together, meet, and make recommendations to the legislature. And then as soon as I left, they did away with it. So maybe it wasn't that good of an idea. So, but that's the, I guess, the gist of what the 2 bills were designed. You know, regional planning so that we have a plan for the next 50 years. And then hopefully conjunctive use of groundwater and surface water, that someday we may be able to lessen the requirements on the surface water and make that available beyond the basins, not rob the basin of origin, but balance it out where it can be used throughout the state. But we followed with a number of excellent enhancements of what was started in Senate Bill 1 and 2 by these gentlemen seated to my left. And so they've made significant accomplishments, and we still have a ways to go. And the parting words that Bullock said to me was, "I know why you're doing this. So when you leave the Senate, you're going to have a job lobbying the rest of your life." He wasn't always right, but he was right on that one. Anyway, but that's great. Senate Bill 1 and 2. So
thank you, Senator Brown. Before we begin Senate Bill 3, I want to make a slight disclaimer. You will notice that we not only have the author of Senate Bill 3, but also the sponsor on the panel, and that is by design. Senate Bill 3 ultimately passed as an omnibus bill, and that was a high-stakes strategy that I hope we're going to hear about. But it contained within it the provisions of HB 3 and HB 4, which were filed by Chairman Puente the same session, and in their own right were landmark pieces of legislation. So these guys are going to break the bill up and talk about their sort of respective components. And Senator Averitt is also going to talk about the beginning of financing the state water plan. So I give you my personal favorite former member, the former senator from McLennan, the Honorable Kip Averitt.
Thank you, Heather. You'll notice some common threads between what Senator Brown worked through and what we worked through in our further iterations of water policy, and that is it's a fight. And another common theme is that those folks in East Texas take their water very, very seriously. And they have a different perspective than the rest of the state.
They do in West Texas too.
So Senate Bill 3 was actually it was Senate Bill 3 Part 2, because Ken Armbruster tried Senate Bill 3 that session before, and he was pushing the envelope on the finance side, and I believe primarily that's why that bill did not pass. But some of the provisions of that Senate Bill 3 were in our work the next session. Did you carry that bill on the House side, Armbruster's bill?
Yes.
Yeah. My interest has always been, I was a former banker, and I was always interested in the finance side of the deal. And since Senator Brown had brought us a great planning process on how we were going to build our water infrastructure and our water policy out through the future years, obviously what you have to back that up with was resources to get that job done. And everybody along the way had their toe in that pond, and we're trying to figure out how are we going to fund that water plan? How are we going to fund that planning process and all of the other things that go with it, the infrastructure that follows, and the many other different things that are involved. Well, earlier on in my tenure there, working with the Water Development Board at the time, which quite frankly was a lot different than working with the Water Development Board since Carlos got there and beyond. It was a different dynamic completely. But we developed we passed some stuff that allowed for evergreen bonding, and we passed in the Finance Committee, we got about $100 million roughly over 2 sessions to fund bonds for those early projects to the tune of about $1.2 billion. But that was obviously not a sustainable process because, as Governor Bullock said, you know, the next session you come back, you're dealing with new people, new dynamics, new politics, and things change. So that was not a sustainable process. And so we were looking for that long-term permanent funding proposition that would have carried the work forward. And we got close, man. We were close, but I've been told not to tell that story, so I won't. You know, we still had the challenge of bringing all of the good policy forward. And Senate Bill 3 was initially filed with 5 different articles involved, and by the time Chairman Puente got his all of his things on there, and we added a component for reservoir designation. Finally, Senate Bill 3 passed with, I don't remember, 12 or 15 articles in it. And it was pretty comprehensive. And it was the designation for the reservoirs was highly contentious, especially in East Texas, where Marvin Nichols was. And I had promised everybody, that we were either going to do all 17 of those reservoir designations, or we were not going to have a designation at all or none. And folks in Dallas were really, really nervous about that. They didn't know should they trust me or not. And that led to all kinds of interesting dynamics and the drama and mixed messages and all kinds of things going on. And just like Senate Bill 1 with their designation for the controversial.
Regional water planning groups.
No, the controversial. Junior rights. Junior rights. That stinky old junior rights thing.
That's a dead deal.
Well, my stinky deal was Marvin Nichols, and the folks in East Texas didn't want Marvin Nichols, and it was a war. It was a war to get that done, and we got down to the last minutes of negotiation and way late into the session, and we finally got our final vote. We had 99 of the 100 votes needed, and I was devastated. And then a really aggressive lobbyist got in Terry Hodge's face, the Terry Hodge representative from Dallas, and said, "I don't think you understand what you just did. You voted no on this bill that Dallas has to have." And so Terry Hodge made the motion to reconsider, and we got 100 votes on that deal. But the thing I'm most proudest of on that whole ordeal, that whole chapter, is the fact that we would not have had anything pass due to speaker politics, due to the fussing and fighting between the House and the Senate, and all kinds of external noise going on around that was trying to mess up really everybody's business. But had Chairman Puente and I not had such a good working relationship, we would not have had those bills. Because we kept talking to each other through the whole thing, through all of the noise. We kept reassuring, you do your deal, I'm going to do my deal, and we're going to get it all done. And we trusted each other, and we took care of each other. And Robert was a loyal Democrat, and I was, at the time, a loyal Republican. And, you know, kind of like Senator Brown was a good Republican, and Bullock was about as hardcore Democrat as they come. But back then, you could talk to people and work things out because we had the best interests of our state in mind.
Yes.
That's what I'm proud about.
Yeah. Does that conclude your remarks?
I'm done.
Okay. As Senator Averitt alluded to, the passage of Senate Bill 3 was unlike anything I have ever witnessed in my over 20 years in the business, and would not have happened but for bloodletting persistence, hanging in there, and having tremendous respect from the members of the body that he served in. And so Chairman Puente, while that bill, Senate Bill 3, Averitt Puente, Chairman Puente should be bronzed for what he went through to pass Senate Bill 3. So look forward to hearing about the other articles from Chairman Puente that were in Senate Bill 3 as filed.
Well, thank you, Heather. Texas Water Development Board, great conference. And Kathleen Jackson, the tweet you mentioned about Heather, now you know why it was so popular. And speaking of Heather, I think every one of us here, you mentioned Water Hall of Fame, and I think we're very flattered and appreciated by that, but I think all four of us recognize that each one of us had staff members, Carol, Heather, Hope, myself, and Liz, that really helped us carry that ball forward. So any applause that we get, please accept those also. Staff needs to accept those also.
Amen.
So Senate Bill 3 was, in my opinion, obviously monumental. It was something that was really needed for the state. As Kip mentioned, the prior session, we tried the e-flows part of it and some other parts of Senate Bill 3. We had a Senate Bill 3 that particular session, but it fell victim to just inability to get it off the ground, enough consensus on it. And oftentimes, that's what happens with these big major bills, is it takes more than one session. So in 2007, we had Senate Bill 3 again. Luckily, I was chairman of Natural Resources, so I had some control over that. To make sure these kinds of issues went as forward as possible, I filed House Bill 3, which was the House version of the Senate bill. Also filed House Bill 4. And, you know, think of about 10 years ago when this, in the 2007 legislative session, water conservation was very important, so important that every community thought that the other community should do it. We shouldn't do it because of these particular things that's unique to our city or our particular groundwater district or water supply corporation. Everybody thought it was a great idea, but just wasn't really bought into it. For example, I filed a bill that asked cities over 3,000 connections to have a plan. You don't have to implement it, just have a plan. So that's how water conservation started. So House Bill 4, which is also called House Bill Carol Baker, also needed to pass. And so the bills go through their normal route. Within Senate Bill 3, as Kip mentioned, there was the Reservoir Bill. That also was a separate bill by Will Hartnett. If you all recall, Will Hartnett is a representative from Dallas. that bill in my committee failed in committee. One member said he was going to vote for it. He ended up voting against it, so that bill failed. And this was towards the end of the session. So all of a sudden, reservoirs are very, very important, obviously, to Dallas. Dallas was just going crazy over it. So obviously, we oftentimes have other vehicles. Senate Bill 3 became that vehicle. I myself had an EAA bill, Edwards Hartford Authority bill, that also fell victim during the session to other issues. But we knew we had Senate Bill 3 as a vehicle, so that bill got on Senate Bill 3. And with all due respect to the senators here, us House members know that we work hard, and we are really what makes the legislature go. And all the good things about Kip, he learned in the House. So that's to be understood. So, but to give you an example, Senate Bill 3, when it left the Senate, was 30-0 vote with about maybe 5 amendments. Debate on it took about 2 or 3 hours. Senate Bill 3, when it got to the House, it was debated over 3 days. It got killed on a point of order, came back up because of speaker politics about the politics of trying to remove the speaker. Everything fell victim to different timelines that we missed. So prior to every vote of substance on a bill, you had to have a motion to suspend the rules because we were out of time. And that requires 2/3. So every bill needed 100 votes, as he mentioned. And yes, we got 99 votes. And so procedurally, you have to look for somebody that voted against it to make a motion to vote for it. Perfectly that somebody from Dallas voted against it, Terry Hodge. And so she was lobbied very hard to please make a motion to bring the bill back up so we can look at it. And sure enough, the bill comes back up and we have a vote on it and we pick up the necessary vote. So Senate Bill 3 was very, very important. It had the e-flows issues in it, reservoirs, countless groundwater district bills. And you talk about, Senator Brown, you talk about legislation that you pass that's changed later on. Senate Bill 1 talking about the preferred method of management of groundwater districts. It has changed that's the preferred method of strangulation. And that's where we are sometimes with groundwater districts. Most of them are perfectly well groundwater districts. We have some ones that we still need to work on, but I know Sarah's out there, and I don't mean anything disparaging about groundwater districts. They're doing well, but they have a purpose and they have a reason that they have these types of regulations. So there was a fair number of groundwater districts in that bill also. So and not to mention another Bear Met, if y'all recall, Bear Metropolitan Water District that SAWS took over. That bill was actually not in Senate Bill 3. It was a standalone bill, but Kip was keeping it in his back pocket as leverage in case the House didn't do it, necessarily do what we all wanted it to do, which was to pass these 3 bills. So I think what I want to be able to mention is that these monumental bills, if you look at some of the politics behind them, it takes almost a catastrophe to pass these kinds of bills. If you go back to Senate Bill 1, we had a very, very severe drought in 1996. The state of Texas, the EAA Act, federal lawsuits, almost anything that we do is a result of a catastrophic event. Why do you think there's so much talk now about fixing flooding issues? Hurricane Harvey. All of a sudden, we're allowed to dip into the rainy day fund because of a catastrophic event. So if you have a drought, a budget surplus, and political will, then you can pass, I think, bills such as Senate Bill 1, 2, and 3.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. We're now going to conclude overview of these bills with House Bill 4. And I like to, as I said earlier, describe HB 4 as the bow around all of this previous work, or as I was traveling the state, the bookend on Senate Bill 1. In every session prior to 2013, I believe there was an attempt to try to establish a dedicated source of revenue to fund the state water plan. I certainly know Senator Averitt, as he says, give it the college try for 4 sessions. But it was not until 2013, under the leadership and guidance of Chairman Allan Ritter, was the state able to realize that historic, lasting, going to make a difference for generations to come, investment, predictable and ongoing investment in the state water plan. And truly, he is the people's favorite. People have been talking about the panel, and then they'll say, and we can't wait to just talk to Allan Ritter. I'm like, oh, but of course. So the Honorable Allan Ritter, author of House Bill 4.
Well, Heather, thank you. Why do I feel like I'm being set up here? Oh, Lord, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see so many faces that were actually a part of House Bill 4, not only on this podium, but out in this audience. I would kind of like to go back to, when you look at House Bill 4 of 2013, you got to go back to Senator Brown and SB 1. And I've had the pleasure of going a lot of states in this wonderful country of ours, and I hear time and time again about how great a job that the state of Texas has done, and it's all because of Senate Bill 1. And without Senate Bill 1, 2, 3, there would not be a House Bill 4. There wouldn't be any reason for financing anything. But thank you. I wasn't there in 97 when y'all did that. I got to come after it and learn and work with Buster and Kip and Robert. And I can't tell you how much brain matter there is in these 3 chairs when it comes to water. We would have never had HB 4 done without the people that were involved in it out in the audience. These gentlemen here, a little lady named Liz Fazio, who happened to be our staff person that ran our committee, but also brought to the table through her legal work, bonding, general counsel, that was just worth its weight in gold, y'all. I just can't tell you how important it was. But when I look back at HB 4 and what we did 2013, a lot of things had to happen. It's kind of like, you ever heard where, the moon, the planets, everything had to line up? Well, that's exactly what it was for us. You had to have all of the legislation that was done years before had to have been done and in place. You had to have a speaker that made it a priority, that put it out there and wanted it to happen and was 110% behind you. You had to have a speaker that would give you a committee that would work. And we had one. And it took that. But it also, as Robert Puente said, it took a drought. And boy, we had one. I'm from East Texas, where this year we had about 92 inches of rain, and our normal's about 62. And we had, I want to say it was about a third of that amount of rain. And when you have Toledo Bend and Sam Raven Reservoir, that they no longer want to let you have any water out, that gets your attention. So we had all the things lined up. What we didn't have was the mechanism. And, you've heard that since 97, there were many, many methods of financing we looked at. Now, we looked at doing gaming and charging fees for gambling to put it in the water fund. The only thing that I can tell you we never looked at was marijuana. Did any of y'all look at marijuana?
No.
So that was the only one that comes to my mind we didn't look at. So we knew that we could not pass a bill that represented any kind of tax bill. Wasn't going to happen. Hell, I wouldn't even voted for it. Just wasn't going to happen. But with people out in this audience and right here, with Liz, our team, we started just having meetings, thinking out of the box, what could we do? And I said, well, and I'm going to throw some numbers out that are probably inaccurate because my memory's not what it used to be, but it's a little bit. But, we had a cost factor of almost, say, $50 million for projects. We had needed money of about $9 billion, if I remember right. Well, how could we take those numbers and how could we use the financing tools that were given to us and make it work? Maybe go find some seed capital. And the one last thing we had in this magic list of everything being in line was we had some money in a couple of funds. And one had a lot of money. And what we were in one meeting, when we were talking about, well, how could we get seed capital and use general obligation bonds, revenue bonds and such, and turn this into a mechanism that could work to capitalize a program that could work if everything fell in place. And it took a while. It took guys like Senator Tommy Williams, who was over Senate Finance, my dear friend, my senator, and working with them, working with the Speaker, learning about things like the Treasury Fund. But until we got the Water Development Board and really started doing modeling, did we know that it really could work. And it's very simple. It's about management. With what we were talking about, looking at doing, to a degree, you now put the Water Development Board in a hybrid type banking process. They now become a little bit of well, not a little bit. They're in the banking business. While it's not necessarily a profitable banking mechanism, it is a hybrid banking mechanism. But we said, okay, you got to have the tools for them to be able to do this. It took a long time. It took a lot of people. And this started, see, Robert, what year did you leave? What year did I start, Chairman? 09?
Yes, I left in
Okay,
07.
we really started thinking about the different opportunities could be outside of the box, so to speak, in 2009. And it all fell in place then. And that was because the rainy day fund was a mechanism that had a substantial amount of cash. And it was also the way that we dreamed it up was something that members could be comfortable with, that we're taking something of value, cash, from the state of Texas that belongs to we the people, and we're using it for infrastructure to help finance infrastructure for we the people. And we're not going to we the people and saying, well, by the way, we're going to charge you, more taxes in whatever form or fashion. And it actually, as we call it in East Texas, it found a little love amongst members. So we were able to do that. We, everybody knows about, I assume, SWIFT and SWIRF and, the parts that they play in funding with general obligation bonds and revenue bonds. We hope, and time will tell, that we've given the tools to the Water Development Board to manage this, to manage in their hybrid banking way, that they'll have to do the funds and such, and that they always remember it's about protecting the corpus of those funds. And a lot of people look at me like, well, he's crazy. What's he talking about? Well, you are in a hybrid banking position, and you do need to protect the corpus of those funds. Use them for what the Constitution and the legislation allows you to do, but manage it. But I go back and, ladies and gentlemen, it would never, ever happen without SB 1. That piece of legislation is such an important piece of legislation in the state of Texas. It's phenomenal, and I still thank Buster every day. And yeah, he's right. There was a little battle about junior water rights, and they did the right thing.
Thank you. Okay, how are we doing? Thank you, Chairman Ritter. How are we doing? Okay. This concludes the panelist presentations, and we're hoping to have more time for questions. We don't have much, but I definitely want you all to be teed up, ready to ask a question. But I'm going to ask the first one, and let's do it in rapid fire sort of basis. I want all of the bill authors to answer if you could change one thing about your landmark pieces of legislation. And this question comes from Jeff Walker. What would it be? Chairman Brown.
Well, it would be two-pronged.
Okay.
I would eliminate the junior rights provision, and I would also have the Water Development Board have final say-so on the groundwater district planning and the DFC approval, where they could make them modify them if they get off the course.
Sounds a little regulatory-ish.
It needs to be.
Senator Averitt.
Two things. First, of course, we would have loved to have a funding component involved in the bill, and we had something teed up for that. But in retrospect and in hindsight, what Chairman Ritter ultimately accomplished was far better than what we were having to work with at the time. So it was fortuitous that Chairman Ritter got to do that. The other thing is, I always thought that the infleet stream flows process was a little bit bureaucratic, and would have loved to try to streamline that, but it was a negotiated deal, and so we had to live with it.
Chairman Puente.
I think I would, if I was chairman, I would have influenced all the groundwater districts that were created during the time I was there to be more like the Edwards Aquifer Authority. If you look at the Edwards Aquifer Authority, you have built-in DFCs, you have a market, you have almost everything that you would want in a groundwater district as far as how they regulate the groundwater.
Right. Chairman Ritter.
HB 4 specifically, I don't have anything hard that I would know to date that I would have changed. And future legislatures will be looking at that. And at SJR 1, now that I've heard what Buster want to do, I think, well, I probably would have put something in the Constitution about junior water rights.
Great. Questions from the audience? Bill, you told me you were going to be prepared.
Well, I have a comment.
Okay.
I just find it interesting that all four of you did what you did for $650 a month.
It was $600 a month.
And Senator Brown has a comment.
Yeah, I want to comment on one thing is that, when we finish our terms in working in the Senate and the House, we don't always get a chance to carry on and Chairman Puente over here has had that opportunity, and he has demonstrated, the things that, like in Senate Bill 2 we talked about, we need to encourage aquifer storage, we need to encourage desal, we need to encourage the movement of water, and he has done that at SAWS in a way that has made both SAWS a leader in the state but in the nation. Water conservation, innovative movement of water, innovative brackish water and the aquifer storage, and these are the things that we were hopeful would be motivated by the passage of that legislation, and he's had a chance to do that, and I think I'm really proud of the fact of what they've done.
Thank you.
Here, here.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, in closing, one of the things as a former staffer I was going to do was I was going to recognize the staff people that were behind these statesmen. And since they've already been recognized, I just want to point out that they were all women. I am going to take the liberty of recognizing somebody who's not here and often gets overlooked, but was an instrumental part of this process, including the hundreds of people in the room that are not being recognized. But one in particular is C.J. Treadway and Governor Bullock at the end of, oh, there she is. There's Bullock's little woman right there. At the end of his career, Governor Bullock challenged his staff to look on the horizon and bring back to him what had not been done for the state as he was looking at riding off into the sunset. And it was CJ who went and said, I think we need to consider looking at restructuring the water planning process in Texas instead of bottom-up, grassroots, locally driven. And anyway, staffers are really important too, and CJ, thank you for your contribution and remaining a part of the water community. Lastly, I would like to thank our Hall of Fame panelists, not only for their years of service, but their trailblazing, truly trailblazing leadership, and their vision for water, and the really, really important work and mark that they've left on our state for generations to come. Thank you. Please join me in thanking them. Y'all are supposed to, this is your standing.